Welcome to the Chess Channel, the channel where you can learn loads. To date, we have covered some amazing encounters from across the spectrum. Today, we are going to look at a game that was only played yesterday. It stems from the Chess Masters tournament, and this game is between Anish Giri and Wesley So. Both are very strong players, and you don't need to hear it from me, both on a good day, are simply unstoppable. Before we are able to tap into this game, a word if I may on what happened in round 1. Wesley So had beaten Duda when Duda blundered, and Anish Giri was forced to a draw from Gakesh. So this game of round 2 between Anish and Wesley was important for both players. More so, if Anish wins, Anish will take an invaluable point and Wesley will remain stagnant on a single point. With this in mind, let's check out what happened in this game of round 2. Anish Giri, taking the white pieces, started things up with a d4 opening. Wesley develops his kingside knights as he usually does. Anish pushes along with this pawn, and with Wesley answering in this way, once again, Anish Giri goes for the usually line by developing this queenside knight. In response, Wesley pins this knight and brings up the Nimzo. e3 now appears. And now via this push, Giri has a number of choices. In the end, and he sat on this move for just about 1 minute and 40 seconds, he didn't go for the usual, but maybe he tried to somewhat surprise Wesley. Anish developed his kingside knight in anticipation of having the bishop exchanged to the knight, but Wesley had different plans. He pushed along with this pawn, which was an equally surprising initiative. With the center being challenged in more ways than one, Giri chose to get rid of this pawn on d5. Wesley in turn removes this pawn, but how would you think he does this? He used the knight. With this threat on the bishop showing up in under a minute, any ideas how Wesley tries to take control of the situation? He got rid of the knight in this way. The knight here is immediately captured, and black here has a number of possible options. Do you get rid of the knight and hand over the bishop, or do you back off this bishop to safety and have him reserved for a rainy day? Wesley thought about this for over 1 minute and 15 seconds, and in the end decided to pull back this bishop to safety. And what happens from this point on is a bit on the unorthodox side. Anish for some strange reason removed this pawn, and automatically allows Wesley the opportunity to swap the queens and to automatically forfeit white from castling. And yet, what happened next is rather on the strange side of things. Wesley does not take the queen but first removes the knight with a check. Anish captures this pawn, and finally, with the queens eventually retiring, this is the situation at hand. Anish Giri loses his castling rights. He has 2 pawns sitting on a single file and has nothing developed with the exception of 1, 2, 3, 4 single pawns. How bad is this? Not bad at all if you try and compare Wesley's very position. Wesley has, with the exception of a single pawn, absolutely nothing developed. What Wesley has that Anish does not, is that he can at least get his king to safety. He doesn't need to perform this action straight away and can do this at any time he feels he needs to. In this point in time, Wesley tried something else, but can you see what move he went for and why? There is one move that needs to go before any other one. If you look at this pawn on c5, Anish has no way of covering him, but if you do not go after him, after e4 is allowed, the bishop from c1 would have his back, and if you permit this course of action, the pawn would be saved. So with this in mind, Wesley jumped his queenside knight into this outpost, and is not looking to sort out this pawn on c5. There is a way to somewhat save the pawn in a different way. For example, what would this pin do and why shouldn't Anish go for it? If you attack the bishop, should the knight be handed over to the bishop? e4 and castles. And if you try this attack, bishop e3 is right in time and the pawn is somewhat saved. In the meantime, would this position be winning for white, or would it look equal, and this is despite the pawn surplus one side is enjoying? What we saw here is one variation of a possible millions. Right after Wesley went after the pawn, Anish is no rookie to these types of situation. He gave this position a relatively fast review, and in the end he decided to push along with this pawn to force Wesley to break his pawn formation on the queen side. But Wesley played it quite smartly here. He does not take the pawn but picks up the knight and reciprocates the attack on the pawn in this way. He could have chosen to do things the other way round, but Wesley was mainly aiming for piece development. In this instance, we get to experience a slightly weird situation. This pawn on b7 was not taken, but this is what Anish does. Why would Anish Giri opt for this push to a4, and what is the main idea? Wesley removed the pawn with the knight, and what Anish could have tried was this bishop move just to be able to prevent Wesley from castling short. However, after bishop d7, Wesley would probably choose to castle long, and in the end he would still get there. And yet, when this position arose, this is how Anish Giri does his thing. Does this move make sense to anyone, or are we missing something? With the queens coming off already 4 moves back, the probability this game would lead to a decisive result is very low. With Wesley to play, miraculously he does not castle, but this is the move he executes. What this move signifies is that he definitely wants to have some leeway for this bishop to be able to come into the game. As soon as Anish Giri went for this push to the center of the board, Wesley develops the bishop here, and what he might be looking at next is to be able to squeeze in a last-minute check from b3. Anish did not worry for this, and this is in case Wesley was going to go for a check. He too developed the bishop to this outpost. Wesley finally castles, and only now Anish Giri stops the access to b3 by using his king. Rook c8 to try and create a situation led to Anish to immediately get his king to move west of the board. Wesley in turn preps this rook move, and of course with Anish Giri too getting his bishop to find the second. A move that took him over 10.5 minutes, this game was about to die down. f6 double supporting this pawn in the center of the board led to Anish to liquidate. He went for this challenge. Wesley gladly accepts the challenge, and with Anish now capturing of course in this way not to drop the pawn on a5, once again, this game did not look to be going anywhere. There are a few basic tricks that can be used, but both Anish and Wesley have seen them all before. There are very few weak key outposts that can be exploited. Wesley so started marching with his king. Bishop a4 would not be possible because this pawn on the queenside will perish, so with this in mind, Anish repositioned his bishop here. Wesley marches again with this king. And right after this push on the kingside, Anish puts the brakes on the queenside in this way. There is not much you can do here unless one player would be running out of time. With neither having a time problem, Anish Giri came in with this check. Wesley gets his king to find the back rank. And now via this push on the kingside, with this 3 pawns on f2, g3, and h4, parked on black squares, this bishop on e6 is powerless to do anything. The only way to get to any one of these pawns would be to start from f2, but with the bishop on c5, this would look like an impossible task. Wesley returned the knight to the back rank to expose the bishop. Anish too retreats him to a safe haven. And with Wesley trying this knight jump into c6, Anish returns the bishop to c5. The moves here repeat, and the game finally ends in a dead draw. What we have seen today, in terms of the opening tried, was the Nimzo Indian using a specific line of the Rubinstein. The Rubinstein is a solid opening, but it is not abnormal to experience systems that resemble the London. For example, after bishop b4, white can opt for bishop f4, and the game can take an entirely different direction. So to sum up, what are the lessons to be learnt and what can we take away with us? This approach to the Rubinstein, after knight takes d5, a3 attacking the bishop, the trades on circa 3 and 2 moves on. Namely the bishop retreat to a5. Anish Giri removed the pawn on c5. Immediately after, and if you recall, Wesley took the knight with a check, and right after the bishop was captured, it was time for the queens to retire. And even though the king from that point on had forfeited his castling rights, Giri was never in any real danger. With the wild and rather aggressive piece development from the outset, the game died down already from move 11. Both Anish Giri and Wesley so ensured that they would not lose this very important game. and this is how they managed in the end to keep each other at bay and end up sharing the point between them. There is far more to come from this tournament, and we shall be there waiting to see the Big Bang. In the meantime, we sincerely hope there was something to take away with us today and look forward to seeing you next time. In the meantime, take good care and God bless.